Just a few seconds of focused thinking in the right direction can change a habit, an emotion, or even a life. This isn't a quote from a philosopher, but from a psychologist named Richard Wiseman, who spent years searching for practical ways to create change in under a minute. The book *59 Seconds was born from hundreds of real experiments where he proved that people don't need to turn their world upside down to start anew. Sometimes, simply adjusting your perspective in 59 seconds is enough to make life operate in a different direction. This isn't a self-help book that tells you to believe in yourself or always be positive. This work is like a scientific mirror, reflecting unconscious reactions and small habits we thought we controlled. It points out that you can persuade more effectively with sincerity than with arguments, reduce stress with small actions instead of venting anger, be more creative by resting instead of forcing yourself, and even understand yourself through everyday details rather than flowery psychological tests. In an era where everyone wants to quickly change their lives, this book presents a profound paradox. If you change too quickly, you'll only repeat the old in a new form. But when you change slowly and consciously, everything truly becomes different. It doesn't tell you to live slowly, but teaches you to pause at the right moment. Pause to see, to think, to decide differently in the instant when instinct usually makes you react the same way. Then the natural question arises. If it only takes 59 seconds to do things differently, what would happen if we truly utilized those 59 seconds? Could it be that every small decision, the way we speak, the way we look, the way we listen, is silently rewriting the entire story of our lives? Perhaps instead of searching for a new beginning, what we need is a new moment, where everything is still the same, but we see it in a different light. One surprisingly simple truth is that the most effective changes often happen in an instant, like a skilled mechanic who only needs to strike a boiler once and it roars back to life. Not because he's lucky, but because he knows exactly where to strike. Change is similar. It doesn't require 10 years of meditation or 30 days of training. It just needs the right touch point. We don't need to hypnotize ourselves with empty slogans. What we need is a small, simple, evidence-based method, quick enough for you to implement before you can come up with reasons to procrastinate. I call it the science of brief moments, where each action, if done correctly, can unlock a chain of sustainable changes. When I started my research, I met Sophie, the woman I mentioned earlier. She was intelligent with a stable career but always felt empty. She told me she had read dozens of self-help books but her life hadn't improved. "Can you show me an effective way that doesn't take too much time?" she asked, glancing at her watch and smiling. "Maybe about a minute." That seemingly casual remark sparked a concept. If we only had 59 seconds, what would we do to improve? From there, I collected hundreds of experiments from various fields: behavior, memory, motivation, happiness, persuasion, creativity, decision-making, and even love. They all shared one point: they created real and quick changes. Some only required you to write a few lines, smile for half a minute, or change your seating position in a meeting, things so small that no one would believe they were important until the data proved otherwise. In a nursing home, half the residents were given the task of caring for a potted plant. The other half had identical plants, but staff told them they didn't need to do anything. Someone else would take care of it. 6 months later, those who personally cared for their plants were healthier, happier, and even had twice the survival rate. Just one potted plant, but it was a symbol of control. Humans need to feel they can impact the world around them, even if it's just by watering a few drops. That is the root of happiness and success, the feeling of owning your life. When you believe you have choices, you act differently, and the world responds differently. Lose that feeling, and you're like a chess player with only one move left, waiting to lose. These discoveries made me realize we don't need more philosophy. We need evidence. We don't need rousing calls to action. We need a real map, and on that map, each touch point is small but precise. A smile, a few written words, a small act for someone else. Every detail, if done right, can change the rhythm of an entire life from that moment on. I knew then that this journey was no longer just research. It was a live experiment, and I invite listeners, one by one, to step into it with me. No wild promises, just simple evidence of the power of every moment. Remember, you don't need to change the world, just strike the right spot, and the world within you will change first. I once thought happiness was a luxury, something that only appeared in special moments and then vanished like smoke. But when I read scientific works, I realized happiness isn't the ultimate reward, but the beginning of all success. It doesn't wait for us to achieve something new to appear. Rather, it makes it easier for us to achieve everything else. Happy people are often healthier, more creative, have better relationships, and live longer. The only question left is how to touch it. Many people answer that they need more money, but a series of experiments has debunked that illusion. When psychologist Brickman studied lottery winners, he found that after a short period, they were no happier than ordinary people. Conversely, those who won nothing felt joy from small things more clearly. And the wealthy individuals on the Forbes list were only slightly happier than the societal average. It turns out the joy brought by money is just an immediate reaction, like a gulp of soda to quench thirst before the thirst returns. The trap lies in human adaptability. Every new item shines brightly in our eyes for only a moment, then gradually becomes normal. Happiness from material possessions always self-destructs once we get used to it, but there is another part of happiness that scientists call trainable happiness. It comes from action, from the way we write, we smile, we see the world. Daniel Wagner's white bear experiment is a bitter illustration. He asked people to think about anything except a white bear. And when they tried to push it out of their minds, the image of the bear appeared more frequently. The more you try not to think about negative things, the more you think about them. People who try to forget sadness often only deepen it. That's why positive thinking can sometimes backfire. The mind doesn't distinguish between avoiding and focusing. Instead of chasing away emotions, observe them through concrete actions. Psychologists call this expressive writing. People who have recently experienced loss, unemployment, or divorce, when asked to write about their feelings for a few minutes each day, recover faster, get sick less often, and feel more confident. Writing helps us organize the chaos of the mind into an orderly story. Talking can sometimes make us more confused, but writing helps us understand what we are truly facing. From this foundation, researchers like Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough went further. They not only helped people overcome trauma, but also found ways to make them happier. They discovered that simply writing down 3 things you are grateful for each week significantly increases feelings of happiness, improves physical health, brightens mood, and even makes people more active. Gratitude writing is a way to remind us of things we already possess but forget to appreciate. It's like walking into a room that smells of fresh baked goods and gradually no longer noticing the scent, just because you've become accustomed to it. Writing helps us step out and step back in to realize the aroma is still there. Another way is to write about the best possible future. But it must be real, not a fanciful dream, but a detailed visualization of a plausible future where all efforts have been rewarded. Laura King's experiment showed that just 4 days of such writing made people happier for several weeks. When we write, we don't escape into fantasy, but give our minds a chance to shape something worth striving for. Then comes love writing. A seemingly simple exercise, psychologist Corey Floy asked participants to write for 20 minutes about someone they loved and why. After just a few weeks, the results included not only mental comfort, but also reduced cholesterol and stress. Writing out words of love not only helps others know, but also makes us aware that we are living in a network of positive emotions. And there's another form of happiness that doesn't come from a pen, but from a wallet. But contrary to what you might think, buying experiences makes people happier than buying objects. 2 researchers, Van Boven and Jilovich, showed that people who spend money on travel, concerts, or simply dining with someone feel happier and retain that joy longer than those who buy new things. Material possessions wear out, but memories grow more beautiful over time. Moreover, happiness multiplies when we share. $1 spent on others brings more joy than $10 spent on oneself. Elizabeth Dunn's research showed that people who spend money on others are significantly happier than those who treat themselves, even if the amount is very small. The brain reacts to such acts just as it does to eating a delicious meal or being loved by someone. The same brain regions activate, the same deep sense of satisfaction. Even without money, we can still give. A word of thanks, an act of help. 5 small acts of kindness in a day can increase happiness by up to 40%. It seems joy doesn't demand wealth, but only our attention. Finally, there's a secret so simple it's almost comical. A smile can create happiness, not just reflect it. When psychologist Fritz asked people to hold a pencil between their teeth, inadvertently shaping their mouths into a smile, they genuinely felt happier. The body and mind are so linked that simply mimicking an expression makes the brain believe we are happy. A sincere smile lasting a few tens of seconds can reawaken bright memories that were dormant. Thus, happiness is not a hunt, but a series of small actions: writing, giving, being grateful, smiling, changing posture, living proactively. You don't have to wait for life to be perfect to be happy. Being happy is how we make life more perfect, little by little. I once thought persuasion was the art of words, that if only I knew how to speak eloquently, I could make others agree. But then, the cold numbers from psychological experiments told a different story. It wasn't rewards, it wasn't promises, but sincerity and likability that made people change. A group of children was divided into two. All were given paper to draw, a game they naturally loved. Half were promised a medal for being a good player. The other half were promised nothing. When the experiment ended and the children were free to draw, something strange happened. Those who were promised a reward drew significantly less. Joy turned into a task, and a task killed joy. With just one promise, we inadvertently taught the children that if there's a reward, the activity must not be inherently fun. I tried applying this in another experiment, not with children, but with adults. Two groups of volunteers were invited to pick up trash in a park. One group was paid a high wage. The other received a small, symbolic amount. After the work, I asked them how they felt. The ones who received less money said they felt happy and proud. The ones who received more money found the task dull and heavy. It turns out that when we do something for an intrinsic reason, because it feels right, because of our beliefs, we feel lighthearted. But when the reason comes from outside, the joy disappears. This is true not just for picking up trash or drawing, but in work, in study, and even in love. Excessive rewards can destroy natural motivation. If you want others to maintain interest, don't turn it into a transaction. Let them feel the value of the act, not just the value of the reward. But persuasion doesn't stop at motivation. In interviews, in boardrooms, or in any meeting, likability is more important than competence. Researchers Hyen and Zito demonstrated this with hundreds of real interviews. Candidates with better qualifications were not necessarily chosen. The winners were often those who made the interviewer feel comfortable, warm, and trusting. Likable people don't need to say much. They know when to smile, when to look others in the eye, and how to listen with their presence, not with advice. They speak as if building a bridge between two souls, not performing for themselves. In the art of persuasion, sincerity is the strongest currency. And when talking about weaknesses, the paradox continues. In another study, psychologists asked participants to listen to the story of someone who had been expelled from school for cheating. When the person admitted their mistake up front, listeners found them more trustworthy and empathetic. But if they hid it until the end, everything reversed. They saw him as deceptive. Admitting flaws early makes people appear stronger, while boasting about achievements early makes us seem suspicious. I've observed the most successful interviews. The candidate didn't try to appear perfect. They simply said, "I made mistakes, and I learned this when that happened." The room seemed to soften. Honesty has a strange power. It reassures others that they are talking to a real person. But even when you do everything right, life can still throw an unexpected curveball. In those moments, most of us think we've ruined everything. There's a fun experiment that proves the opposite. People forced to wear t-shirts with singer Barry Manilow, an outdated Idol No college student wanted to be associated with felt terribly embarrassed. They believed everyone in the room was staring at them. But in reality, only about 20% of people notice the shirt. We always imagine the spotlight is on us, but most of the time, no one really cares. This is called the spotlight effect, the illusion that others care about our mistakes more than they actually do. Knowing this can make us feel lighter as we move through life. If you accidentally spill water, say the wrong thing, or forget your lines, just smile and continue. Sometimes, others won't even remember what happened. Persuasion, after all, isn't in the mouth but in the feeling. People are conquered not by logic but by empathy. When we make others feel respected, they willingly open up. When we act too clever, they immediately put up walls. Therefore, to be heard, speak as if you don't need to win. Let the conversation have pauses so others feel they also have a place in it. Remember that people aren't looking for perfect explanations. They are looking for truth that carries the warmth of the heart. And in conversations, sometimes an honest glance is more convincing than 1,000 arguments. Success in persuasion doesn't come from technique, but from attitude. When we let go of the intention to manipulate, when we only want to understand and be understood, doors begin to open. It might take a minute, or even less, but in that moment, something changes not just in the listener, but in ourselves too. Some mornings I wake up and feel like doing nothing at all. This familiar feeling makes many people think they lack willpower. But in fact, motivation is not a fire that needs to be fanned, but a machine that needs to be started correctly. When we try to push ourselves with slogans like, "Believe in yourself," the machine only sputters for a moment before shutting down. What keeps it running long-term isn't blind faith, but a clear mechanism between intention and action. In a study with a group of students, some were asked to visualize themselves achieving excellent results in an exam. Another group was simply instructed to make a concrete study plan: when, where, and what to study. The results were thought-provoking. The dreamers scored lower, while the planners showed clear improvement. When we imagine success too early, the brain releases the same reward hormones as if we've already achieved the goal, causing the body to relax and stop trying. Conversely, defining specific steps makes the nervous system treat it as a real task, activating the control center and maintaining sustained focus. The if-then technique is simple yet powerful. If situation A occurs, I will perform action B, for example. If the clock strikes 7, I will open my laptop and write the first 3 sentences. Just a small link between a trigger and an action is enough to shorten the gap between intention and execution. The brain no longer has to debate with itself whether to do it or not. It simply acts. People who applied this technique in Peter Galwitzer's research were twice as likely to achieve their goals as those who only said, "I will try." Micro-starts are also a way to trick procrastination. Just start for 2 minutes only, 2 minutes. When you promise yourself to do something so small that it can't possibly fail, the barrier disappears. The strange thing is, most people, once they've done 2 minutes, continue for another 20. A practical test showed that students who only committed to opening their study materials for 2 minutes were 60% more likely to complete their writing assignments than the group that didn't set this condition. Breaking down rewards is also key to maintaining motivation. The brain doesn't respond to distant promises. It gets excited when it senses completion. Therefore, instead of aiming for a giant goal, turn the journey into a series of short finish lines. Each time you cross a line, you create a real sense of victory, a powerful fuel to continue to the next step. That's also why video games are so addictive. The brain loves small wins. However, not everyone maintains momentum solely through planning. Some still get caught in the spiral of perfectionism, waiting until all conditions are perfect before acting. I was like that until I realized perfection is a trap disguised as preparation. You don't need new tools, just start with the tools you have. Motivation arises from movement, not before it. When you start, you'll want to continue. But if you keep sitting and thinking, you'll just want to think more. Another interesting point is that motivation is not a standalone emotion, but the result of a sense of control. Research at a nursing home showed that residents who were allowed to choose whether to care for plants or arrange their belongings were not only happier, but also lived longer. When they felt they had a choice, their bodies reacted as if they had been injected with new vitality. Control is the oxygen of willpower, but control doesn't mean coercion. If you try to force yourself to do everything with rigid discipline, you'll soon run out of energy. Like muscles, willpower also fatigues. The smarter way is to reduce friction instead of increasing pushing force. Eliminate tempting distractions from the start. Turn off notifications, tidy your desk, prepare your water bottle. When the runway is smooth, a plane doesn't need to roar to take off. There's another trick: don't believe you need inspiration to work. Inspiration is a consequence of action, not a starting condition. The most creative artists have fixed habits. They don't wait for inspiration but let it come during the process. This doesn't kill freedom but gives it a place to reside. Motivation isn't loud. It doesn't need the drumbeat of slogans. It lives quietly in small choices. Writing one more line, reading one more paragraph, returning after each distraction. When you understand this mechanism, moving forward is no longer forced but becomes a natural rhythm. You begin to love the slow process because you know that each small step is striking the right spot. Motivation doesn't come from trying to believe, but from making the action so easy that it's impossible not to do it. When you understand that, you don't need to wait for a good day to start your life. Every morning is good enough to start anew. I've always been curious about those moments when ideas suddenly appear, as if they don't come from me but from some other space. People call it inspiration. But the interesting thing is that science has shown inspiration is not a random flash, but a result of conditions that can be created. It appears when the brain is allowed to play unsupervised. I once stood in a room where 20 people were brainstorming. The atmosphere was buzzing, everyone was talking and laughing. The walls were covered with sticky notes. But when I counted the number of unique ideas, the results were sobering. Groups that worked individually and then combined their ideas generated twice as many better ideas. When in a group, people tend to fall into a state of social loafing, meaning we do less because we believe others will do the work. Moreover, everyone fears judgment, so the boldest ideas often die as soon as they arise. Creativity first needs solitude, not sad loneliness, but a quiet space for fragments of thought to collide. There, you are not interrupted, you don't need to defend ideas, and you can talk to yourself. Afterward, once you have your own seeds, sharing them with others helps them grow faster, just as two separate currents of wind create a wave when they meet. The environment is creativity's silent accomplice. In John Meavy's experiment, people working under high ceilings tended to think more abstractly, while low ceilings stimulated detailed thinking. Colors also have significant power. Blue makes us more creative, red makes us more focused. So if you need an idea, bring blue into your space, a poster, a potted plant, or simply looking at the sky. Even a small potted plant can change the rhythm of thought. Research in offices found that desks with greenery not only made employees happier, but also increased problem-solving ability. Plants soothe the eyes, lower heart rate, and inadvertently put the brain into a relaxed, alert state, the golden condition for association. Ideas need breathing space, not commands. There's another secret. The brain is most creative when we're not trying to be creative. Researchers call this the incubation phase, a break between two focused efforts. When we temporarily step away from a problem, go for a walk, wash dishes, or take a shower, the brain continues to work in silence. In a classic experiment, people who took intermittent breaks while solving difficult problems found the answers twice as often as the group that stubbornly stuck with it until the end. Our unconscious is a brilliant problem solver if only we give it time. So when an idea doesn't come, don't force it. Create space for it to wander, read something completely different, look at a painting, listen to music, or simply lie down. In that semi-awake, semi-dream state, the brain connects distant concepts into surprising shortcuts. One person looking at a tangle of wires might see a musical score. Another looks at a map and conceives a transportation system. Not because they are smarter, but because they allow themselves to look in unusual ways. I like small exercises called the inner monkey. This idea stems from an experiment where people were shown a video of people throwing a ball and asked to count the passes. They focused so intently that they didn't notice a person in a gorilla suit walking across the screen. The lesson is clear. We don't lack ideas, we just lack the ability to see what's already there. So, I train myself in the habit of reversing the question. If you want to sell more products, think about how to sell less. If you want to write better, ask what makes people stop reading halfway through. The inverse answer often opens unexpected doors. Creativity doesn't need magic, it needs structure and permission to fail. People afraid of making mistakes rarely invent anything. When we dare to try, we generate new data to learn from. Thomas Edison once said that every failure is just another way to know what doesn't work, but modern science calls that experimentation with feedback. When feedback is fast, the brain forms a continuous series of adjustments, and ideas become more precise through each iteration. One small detail few people notice: ambient sound at a moderate level, not too quiet, not too loud, stimulates creativity most strongly. That's why many people get good ideas sitting in a coffee shop. The clinking of spoons, the wind through the door, distant conversations create a kind of background noise that allows the brain to wander freely without being overwhelmed. So, if you feel stuck, don't blame yourself. Maybe you're in the wrong environment or haven't given your mind the necessary break. Try stepping away from the screen, breathing, looking at the ceiling, or taking a walk outside. Creativity is a combination of focus and letting go, of control and surrender, just like breathing. If you try to breathe consciously, you'll run out of breath, but if you let it be natural, you'll live. Once you understand this mechanism, you no longer fear running out of ideas, because ideas never run out, only the mind closes. And when the mind opens, that flow will connect all fields, from work and art to the way we see others. It is there that we step into another realm of creativity, the realm of human connection, where attraction lies not in technique, but in the invisible resonance between two souls. I used to believe that the attraction between two people was mysterious, an inexplicable lightning bolt. But the more I observed, the more I saw that attraction lies not in magic, but in subtle physiological and psychological reactions. We are attracted not just by a face or physique, but by how the other person makes us feel about ourselves. In a famous experiment, psychologists had men walk across a swaying suspension bridge over a deep gorge. At the end of the bridge, a woman approached them with a questionnaire, smiled, and offered her phone number if they wanted to know more about the research. Most of the men who had just experienced fear and a pounding heart called back. But when the same encounter took place on solid ground, the callback rate significantly decreased. People often confuse physiological arousal, such as a fast heartbeat from fear, with romantic emotion. The excitement from a dangerous or interesting context can be transformed into attraction. From this, we understand why intense shared experiences create a quick bond, a spontaneous trip, an adventurous game, or simply laughing loudly together in an absurd situation all leave a deep imprint on memory. Strong emotions are like glue, and people often confuse their origin. It's not that the other person is extraordinary, but that they appeared in a moment when our heart was pounding. But even knowing this, those feelings are still real, because shared experience is the material of intimacy. There are also attractions that come from smaller things. Another study showed that when a waiter lightly touched a customer's arm, they tended to tip more, and in social situations, people who were lightly touched seemed more agreeable. A well-timed touch is not manipulation, but a way for the body to say, "I trust you." It sends a signal of safety that words cannot convey. However, if the touch is wrong, too obvious, or inappropriate, the reaction immediately reverses. Therefore, its power lies in its naturalness, like a breeze passing by, not an intentional hand. A sense of closeness is also nurtured by similarity. In dating experiments, couples who shared common interests or similar speaking rhythms often felt more in sync. When we mirror body language, nodding at the same pace, smiling when the other person smiles, both brains begin to synchronize. Neuroscientists call this the phenomenon of emotional mirror waves. That's when we don't just understand, but also feel the other person. Attraction arises from harmony, not ostentatious differences. One of the most beautiful paradoxes is that people are not drawn to perfection, but to truth. In Aronson's experiment, competent people who made small mistakes, like spilling coffee, were rated as more attractive than perfectly flawless individuals. Minor flaws made them more human, more relatable. It allowed others to breathe a sigh of relief, realizing they didn't need to pretend to be liked. When we dare to show a clumsy side of ourselves, we are opening the door for genuine connection. Acting aloof or hard to approach only makes us a puzzle no one wants to solve. Meanwhile, people who know how to listen, say a little less, and leave space for others to express themselves make conversations warmer. In Aaron's communication study, simply having two strangers successively answer increasingly deep questions from, "What do you like to do?" to, "What is your most painful memory?" After just 45 minutes, most felt close enough to become best friends. Some even fell in love. Humans crave to be seen, heard, and understood more than to be admired. Therefore, attraction is not a performance but a presence. When you listen attentively, your gaze is steady, your voice slows down. The other person senses something rare in this noisy world, being cared for without being scrutinized. No technique can replace that feeling. Remember, the goal isn't to make someone like you, but to make both of you feel safe being yourselves. Attraction isn't just for love, it exists in every relationship: colleagues, friends, teachers, and students. A little humor, an honest glance, a specific thank you all create a silent current between people. We think we live by reason, but in reality, we make decisions based on emotion, and that emotion arises from genuine contact, not seductive promises. When we understand this, we see the world differently. We stop asking, "How do I make others like me?" and start asking, "How do I make them feel comfortable when they're around me?" Only then does attraction become natural, requiring no staging. A person who knows how to create a safe space for others is always remembered, even after they've left. And like everything else in life, true, lasting attraction doesn't come from chasing, but from returning. When we live true to ourselves, honest, generous, attentive, that energy radiates not so that someone else will see it, but because we have seen ourselves. And perhaps that is the deepest form of attraction, when our presence makes others want to become a better version of themselves. I've always believed that what keeps lovers together isn't the deepest understanding, but the small actions that make us feel seen in relationships. Saying the right thing is more important than saying a lot. People still mistakenly believe that intimacy comes from pouring out one's heart, telling everything, but sometimes the right silence is worth more than 100 words of comfort. There was an interesting study where couples were asked to spend a few minutes each week writing down their true feelings about their relationship. No judgment, no complaints, just recording what they felt. After a few months, they not only had fewer conflicts, but also felt 20% more deeply connected. Writing helped them realize what was important and what was just a momentary reaction. By putting emotions on paper, people learned to observe instead of retaliating. Lasting relationships are often built on such quiet moments, not on arguments. I once advised a friend, after many arguments with his wife, stop trying to listen actively in a textbook way. Instead of nodding and repeating her words, do something concrete. Pick a beautiful memory, reprint an old photo, and place it where both can see it. A few days later, he texted me, saying that, strangely enough, they talked more easily. A small symbol of us has the power to connect far more than hours of analyzing right and wrong. It reminds us that a relationship isn't just a series of clashes, but also beautiful moments that once were. From connection, I thought about its opposite, stress. People believe that venting it will bring relief, but science says otherwise. The more you try to release anger by yelling, hitting, or punching a pillow, the more your body maintains a heightened state of arousal. Anger isn't released, it's practiced. When we punch something, the brain understands that hitting is a way to reduce discomfort, and each time, that reflex deepens. Instead, reframe the emotion in a few seconds. Someone comes home from work stuck in traffic, angry about wasted time. If they think, "I'm stuck," the emotion boils over. But just by changing the frame, this is an opportunity to listen to my favorite album. Their heart rate decreases, and their body calms down. Reframing doesn't erase the truth, but it changes how we define it. A series of studies has shown very simple things that help reduce stress more effectively than any expensive therapy session. A dog in the house, a genuine laugh, a few minutes in the sun, a slow piece of music-hall adjust physiological rhythms and hormones. In a lab, simply looking at a photo of a beloved pet significantly reduced participants' blood pressure. Laughter is similar. It's not just a joyful reaction, but a medicine that regulates heart rate and boosts immunity. Stress doesn't disappear through resistance, but through small, proactive actions. People who are easily irritable don't need to promise to be calm. They just need to change their environment a little, walk for 10 minutes, drink water, look into the distance. These seemingly trivial actions cut off the stress reaction chain in the nervous system. Adjusting a small habit is much easier than trying to fix an entire temperament. I once witnessed a middle-aged man warned by his doctor about high blood pressure who consistently forgot to take his medication. After being advised to place the pill next to his toothbrush, he never forgot again. When behavior is linked to an existing habit, it naturally becomes part of life. Reducing stress is the same. Make good actions easier to do than bad ones. Everything we call peace is actually just a series of well-chosen moments. When we learn to choose different reactions, choose to see things from a new perspective, choose to keep a shared image instead of a complaint, the world around us begins to calm down. Peace is not a destination but a new rhythm, where old reflexes are replaced by conscious choices. And once the mind has learned to calm down in clashes, it also becomes wiser when facing other decisions that shape life. Because, in fact, the ability to connect with others and the ability to make wise decisions both stem from the same skill: knowing how to listen to yourself before reacting. There are times when we stand at a crossroads, the list of choices as long as a labyrinth. We analyze, compare, ask for opinions everywhere, but the more we try to be rational, the more confused we become. Overanalysis makes us lose the ability to feel what's truly important. The human brain is good at balancing reason and intuition. But when we force it to calculate too much, the emotional part, where real experiences are stored, is cut out of the game. In a famous experiment, students were asked to choose a poster to take home. One group chose purely by feeling. The other group had to write down reasons why they liked each poster before deciding. Weeks later, the group that analyzed thoroughly grew tired of the poster they chose, while the group that went with their gut feeling remained satisfied. When a problem is vague, deep analysis doesn't increase decision quality. It only makes us lost in speculation. Intuition, if nurtured by experience, is often more accurate than we think. But intuition is not impulsive action. It is the product of the incubation phase, when the brain processes data in silence. After pondering a problem long enough, step away from it. Take a shower, go for a walk, or do manual labor. When you return, the answer often appears naturally, without effort. The brain needs space to connect pieces of information that consciousness is not strong enough to assemble. Studies call this controlled unconscious thinking, an effective form of decision-making for complex problems. For big choices, choosing a career, a life partner, a place to live, the most effective way to reduce regret is to define criteria before looking at the list of options. If we look at each option first, the brain is primed by the most prominent factors: price, appearance, reputation, and forgets its true criteria. When we finalize the criteria beforehand, everything becomes clear, like a compass in the fog. A familiar example is buying a house. Many people start by looking at houses and then think about what they need. The result is falling into the hands of the most persuasive real estate agent. But those who set their priorities up front, light, quiet, close to a park, make decisions quickly and with less regret. Regret arises when we choose but forget the reason for choosing. Keeping criteria up front is a way to keep ourselves out of the spiral of prices. In everyday life, we are constantly manipulated by how information is presented. The same content, but saying, "This product is 90% effective," is completely different from 10% of users fail. The framing effect of gains and losses skews emotions, causing us to misjudge risks. Politicians and advertisers understand this better than anyone. Knowing how to reframe a question is a form of self-defense before reacting. Ask yourself, if I reverse the way this is phrased, would I feel differently? Often, you'll be surprised by the answer. Another trap is the default effect. When an option is set as the default, like organ donation or receiving promotional emails, most people stick with it without thinking. In countries that simply change the opt-in box from "I agree" to "I do not agree," the organ donation rate tripled. We are lazier about changing defaults than we think. If you want to live with purpose, review the defaults operating in your life. Habits, schedules, relationships that you leave alone simply because it's easier than changing. Then there's the art of reading others, which many people think they can learn through eye contact or facial expressions. In reality, science shows there are no single reliable signs of deception. Liars don't necessarily avoid eye contact. Sometimes they stare intently to prove their sincerity. What's valuable is consistency across a series of behaviors: voice, speaking speed, breathing rate, and the content of the words. When these elements diverge, a calm voice but clenched hands, words saying, "Trust me," but the body slightly recoiling, we should pay attention. Deception lies not in the eyes but in the discord between emotion and expression. I still remember a story from an investigative training class. The instructor said, "Don't look for unusual signs, look for the normal that's missing." When someone recounts a real memory, they often include meaningless details: buying coffee, the sound of traffic outside. A person fabricating a story only tells what serves their purpose. Truth is messy, deception is tidy. Learning to listen to the gaps between words can sometimes be the way to recognize the truth. When we understand that too much analysis blinds us and too much trust makes us gullible, we begin to seek a balance where reason and emotion go hand in hand. Good decision-making is not about never making mistakes, but about making mistakes quickly, correcting them quickly, and not torturing oneself for having dared to choose. Life doesn't reward those who are always right, but those who know how to move forward even when wrong. In this complex world, sometimes the most important decision is how we raise another human being, teaching them to believe in themselves. Because all wise choices made by adults begin with how they were taught as children. I once witnessed a 6-year-old praised by her mother for being so smart. She beamed. But the next time she encountered a harder math problem, she quietly pushed her notebook aside. Praising intelligence makes children fear failure, while praising effort makes them want to try again. That's not philosophy, it's the result of a series of psychological studies. Carol Dweck demonstrated that when children are praised for effort, their brains react differently. The areas associated with learning light up instead of the areas for avoiding mistakes. Conversely, when children are labeled smart, each failure becomes proof that they are no longer worthy of the praise. One of the most famous experiments on willpower is the marshmallow experiment. Children were placed in front of a marshmallow and promised that if they waited 15 minutes without eating it, they would receive another. The results showed that children who knew how to distract themselves singing, closing their eyes, looking away were more likely to delay gratification and later found more success in academics, work, and relationships. But the important thing was not instinct, but strategy. Willpower is not an innate talent. It can be trained in very specific ways. Separating from sources of temptation, setting short-term goals, visualizing long-term results. I once met a mother who read somewhere that listening to classical music would make her child a genius, so she played Mozart for her infant of a few months every day. But science tells a different story. The Mozart effect was just a media misunderstanding. Music doesn't increase IQ. What truly develops children is real interaction. When parents talk and play with their children, asking open-ended questions, the child's brain is stimulated many times more than by passive listening to music. Intelligence arises from connection, not from melodies. Labels and expectations also subtly shape lives. In one study, students who teachers were told had exceptional potential even though they were actually chosen randomly had significantly higher scores after 1 year than the control group. When others believe in us, our brains function differently. The way we are labeled, the expectations placed upon us, gradually become a framework for ourselves. So, a seemingly innocent word from a parent can either plant or kill a child's belief in themselves. I once asked a group of parents, if your child failed a competition, what would you say? Many responded, "It's okay, you're smart, you just need to try harder next time." This sounds encouraging, but the hidden message is, smart is the default, failure is a crack. The better approach is, you tried and what did you learn? Shifting the focus from outcome to process. Then, failure is no longer an end but a natural part of growing up. From teaching children, I thought about adults themselves. We also carry personality frameworks formed early on, but sometimes we judge each other by superficial signs. Some believe handwriting reveals character, that curved or straight, wide or narrow strokes indicate personality. But in reality, there's no evidence that graphology reflects personality. The art of reading handwriting is just a myth, easy to believe because we want to find order in chaos. If you want to understand someone, observe their small, repetitive behaviors. Behavioral science shows that circadian rhythms, how they organize their living space, the pets they choose, and their reactions to change reveal more than any personality test. People who habitually wake up early and keep their workspaces tidy often belong to the highly conscientious group. People who prefer messy, flexible spaces might be more creative. Even pets reflect personality to some extent. Dog owners tend to be extroverted, while cat owners tend to be more introverted. Human personality can be broadly measured by 5 main groups: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability. But more important than labeling is understanding that these traits are not fixed. Openness can be nurtured by new experiences. Conscientiousness increases when we find meaningful goals, and emotional stability is not genetic, but the result of knowing how to adjust thoughts before reacting. Personality is not a sentence, but a diary that can be rewritten every day. In my years of working with hundreds of people, I've realized that the difference between truly mature individuals and those who just grow older lies not in knowledge or experience, but in their willingness to observe themselves as if looking at someone else. They don't look for reasons to justify themselves, but for patterns to change. Someone who knows they get angry easily won't deny it, but will find ways to design an environment to avoid outbursts. Someone who knows they procrastinate will set up an if-then system, By understanding the structure of your own personality, you don't need to try to be someone else, but simply apply effort in the right place where it creates real change. I once met an old man, almost 80, who walked every morning and read every evening. When asked his secret to a peaceful life, he just smiled. I choose things that are easy to do right and hard to do wrong. Perhaps that is the spirit of everything we've discussed. All sustainable change begins with small actions, in the right place, repeated long enough to become who we are. Because ultimately, people don't change through grand revolutions, but through the things they do in under a minute, but do every day. And in that brief moment, when we choose correctly, an entire life shifts course. If there's one thing this book wants to remind us, it's that life doesn't need big leaps, just the right touches. A minute of conscious thought can replace years of unconscious repetition. A small action, if placed at the right moment, can alter the trajectory of an entire life. We don't need to become extraordinary, we just need to understand our own ordinary mechanisms. The science in this book doesn't teach us how to control the world, but how to adjust our perspective to make the world more breathable. It tells us that persuasion lies not in words but in sincerity. Creativity doesn't come from coercion, but from moments of quiet. Happiness doesn't come from rewards, but from the feeling of having choices. And that what we think is complex love, motivation, willpower are sometimes just simple biological reactions that we can learn to control with subtle changes. But the important question isn't what we've understood, but what we will do in the next minute. Will we use those 59 seconds to judge or to observe? To chase something grand or to adjust a small but truly important detail? Perhaps the difference between the awakened and the weary lies in the ability to pause for a moment before reacting. I wonder, if right now you could change one small thing, just one, what would it be? The way you speak to a loved one, the way you start your morning, or the way you face an old fear? What if you only needed 59 seconds to write down a thought that has never been spoken, an intention that has never been started? No one can live a perfect life, but everyone can live one conscious minute, and then repeat it enough times to turn it into a lifetime. Perhaps that is the true magic this book wishes to leave behind. A magic that doesn't come from AI or from grand systems, but from the human hand that knows how to pause, to think, and to start anew in under a minute.